Let's begin module number 7 by looking at the process of taking our virtual machines and being able to use a pre-configured virtual machine that we've spent some time on getting right. We've configured it, we have installed patches, we have managed the security around it, all of the things that we need to do, right? We spent a lot of time on that. By taking those virtual machines and using them as the basis for the deployment of other virtual machines, we can save a whole lot of time and avoid a whole lot of error in our environment. Lesson 1 is about creating templates and clones. What we're going to do here is we're going to create a template from an existing virtual machine. We're going to then take that template and deploy a virtual machine from it. Now that's all well and good if we want to do this over and over and over again, but you notice that there were 2 steps there. One of the other things that we can do is we can simply take an existing virtual machine and clone it. A really good solution for a one-off scenario. Okay? Then we're going to look at creating a custom specification for our guest operating systems so that once our virtual machines have been cloned, being identical to the original, we can then take the existing clone or the newly created clone and we can customize it by doing things like changing its host name and changing its IP address, and on the Microsoft side, maybe joining the domain and changing the SID and those sorts of things that are there that require virtual machines to be unique within one another or from one another. So a template, it's a master copy of a virtual machine that we can use to provision new virtual machines. So the process starts like this. I build a VM, I install the guest OS, I patch and configure the guest OS, and maybe I even install some software in it, maybe not, okay? Some applications. Okay. Once that's done, I take this virtual machine and I'm going to make it a template. There's a couple of different ways to do this, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So what we've got are our guest operating system, some applications maybe, some specific virtual machine configurations, and oh yeah, let's not forget about VMware Tools. That is an absolutely critical component. Why should I have to reinstall VMware Tools over and over again if I can simply do it one time in our template? Now what I do want to show you here is that we're looking at our VMs and templates view. You will not see templates over here in the in the hosts and clusters view. You'll only see them in the VMs and templates view here. And here is our template. And the template has a little bit different of an icon from the actual virtual machines as well. So you'll be able to see in your inventory the difference between a virtual machine and a template. Beyond the little icon, there's not a whole lot of difference between a virtual machine and a template. When I take a virtual machine, I can right-click on it, and then I have this option of cloning or converting a virtual machine into a template. Now, the process of cloning to a template creates another copy of that VM. So if you can imagine, what we're working with here are the virtual machine files in the data store. A set of virtual machine files, of course, includes virtual disks of some significant size, as well as the rest of the files, the VMX files, the NVRAM files, whatever else is in there, okay? By cloning a virtual machine to a template, we select a data store, perhaps a new data store. We give the template a name, and a new folder is created, and a copy of those files are then created on the data store. So it's an entirely separate copy that would leave the original source virtual machine in place for you to do stuff with, whatever you might want to do. Okay? So here what we've done is we've right-clicked, we've gone to clone, and we've cloned a virtual machine to a template. Now, one of the nice things about this is that if your virtual machine happened to be in production and were powered on, like these 3 virtual machines here, you can still clone that virtual machine to a template. When you clone a VM, whether it's to another virtual machine or to a template, that virtual machine can be either powered off or it can be powered on. Now, when we convert a virtual machine to a template, that simply takes the existing virtual machine and does a couple little tricks, very little tricks. One thing that we mentioned way back in module number 2 was that a virtual machine had a file name called VMX, right? That's the configuration of the VM, a VMX file. A template has a file name of VMTX. The difference between the two files, simply the letter T. All we're doing when we take a virtual machine and we convert it to a template is we rename the VMX to VMTX, we make a note in the database for vCenter, and we change the icon in the inventory. That's it. Simply the letter T, that's really the only difference. And now, once we have a template in place, we can then take a virtual machine and deploy a VM from that template. Okay? So you'll notice when you right-click on a VM, not only do you have the clone option, but you have the template option where you can convert the VM to a template. You also have the option to export a VM as an OVF template so that you can take that OVF template and deploy it in other environments as well. Now note when you do a conversion, the virtual machine must be powered off first. We can also take a template like we've done here and clone it. Cloning a virtual machine to a template allows you to take an existing template, make another copy on the data store so that you can make modifications in the new template so that you can use them for different purposes. So that's another option. Now, how do I update a template? Well, certainly we're going to have operating system fixes and patches, and we may want to make some configuration changes to the guest operating system and the applications within a template so that when we deploy new VMs from that template, the new VMs have the benefit of whatever changes, whatever updates I've made to the template. Now, a template, even though the only difference between a template and a virtual machine is the letter T, a template is not considered a virtual machine. So we cannot power the thing on. What we'll want to do instead is right-click on the template, select Convert to Virtual Machine, power that virtual machine on, make those changes, shut that virtual machine down, and convert it back to a template. Okay? A recommendation that we make here is to take the virtual machine and place it on some sort of isolated network so that it doesn't accidentally become discovered by whatever systems are in place in your environment and get utilized. Okay? That's an option, of course. If that is not a realistic scenario in your environment, that's just fine. Once we have our template in place, it's time to deploy new virtual machines from this template. Simply right-click on the template, select New VM from Template, and you go through a wizard. And that wizard has you doing things that are very similar to the brand new VM from Scratch wizard, which says, hey, we're going to name the virtual machine, select the VMs and templates folder, select a compute resource, a cluster, or an ESXi host, select the data store, and then we're going to have some clone options that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Now, when it comes to cloning a virtual machine, it's very similar to deploying a new VM from a template, except instead of starting from a template, we're starting from a virtual machine. Right-click on that virtual machine, go to the clone menu, and select Clone to Virtual Machine. Once again, this VM can be powered on or it can be powered off. We'll run through the same sort of wizard, giving options, making changes, setting the name, choosing the cluster or the ESXi host, selecting the data store, and there we go. Now, I mentioned before that when you clone a virtual machine or you deploy a VM from a template, we don't want to have two VMs in the same environment be bit for bit identical. There are certainly some things that would cause conflicts and cause issues in the environment. Mostly things around identifying the virtual machine, like its host name, the virtual machine name itself in the inventory, and also on the networking side. MAC addresses on virtual NICs, for example, IP addresses, and so on. So we've got to make sure that every new VM be slightly different from one another. And this is where the guest operating system customization process comes in. Okay? These are those clone options that appear in the wizard. What we have the opportunity to do is, as we're deploying a new virtual machine, either from a clone or based on a template, we can rename the computer, set up the networking settings. On the Windows side, we can do some licensing things, and we can also make modifications to the Windows SID or security identifier if that's something that's important to us. Okay. We can do this from scratch. Every time we deploy a new VM, we can go through a little wizard and answer some questions, or we can answer these questions in advance and create what we call a guest operating system customization specification. That's a little bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that we can save the answers to the wizard in vCenter's operating system and then deploy those or select that specification each time we deploy a Windows or a Linux virtual machine. Then when you hit the clone options, you have the opportunity to customize the operating system. Also note that you can customize the virtual machine hardware and power on the virtual machine after creation. Okay? But when you choose to customize the operating system, you can then look into vCenter's database, choose the customization specification that you had created earlier. That customization specification, by the way, can be found on vCenter's homepage. And then that custom spec will be applied to the VM. Now, creating a full clone, like we've talked about, is a great thing for us to be able to do. But a couple of years back, VMware invented a new technology called instant clones. Instant clones are a really amazing technology that uses what we call a parent virtual machine, a powered-on virtual machine from which to spawn off another virtual machine process. It works like this, and it's got some very specific use cases. It's not something that today we can do from the vSphere UI client. It's something that we can do on the command line by utilizing VMware's APIs. But I want to talk to you about this so you can get an idea as to what some of the capabilities around instant clones are. And then you'll see if you choose to use systems like Horizon Virtual Desktops, instant clones are the primary way that we deploy new virtual machines over and over and over and over again in just a couple of seconds apiece. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a parent virtual machine. Okay? This is a virtual machine that uses the basis for child clones. This virtual machine is powered on, and it's running on each ESXi host that we want to be able to create instant clones on. What we'll do is we'll quiesce this parent VM, meaning we'll stop all operations. no CPU activity, no changes to the memory, no changes to its virtual disks. We'll then take that memory footprint of that VM that's stored in ESXi, and we'll take the VMDK, the virtual disk, and we're going to place those in read-only mode. Now, a set of memory for a VM and a virtual disk in read-only mode doesn't do a VM much good, but it does allow us to spawn new virtual machine processes pointing to that same set of memory and that same virtual disk. That virtual machine now is sitting in the exact same state as the parent VM was in when we quiesced it, meaning it will be powered on, ready for users to log in, ready for use, and so on. Meaning no boot process required for each of these child VMs. So these child VMs are then spawned, and we need to begin working in these child VMs. Well, every time they want to write, for example, a new block of data to storage, or write a new page of memory, we'll execute a copy on write procedure so that these new child VMs get their own unique set of pages of memory and blocks on disk. So each child VM now gets its own unique RAM and a Delta VMDK file that is then tied to the parent space disk that simply contains the changes that the child VM has made to the disk. Now the child VM can use not only its unique memory and Delta disk, but the shared memory and the shared base disk from the parent. This process makes things really super fast for us to create brand new virtual machines. There are a number of use cases for instant clones in the environment, and as time goes on, we'll see those use cases become more and more frequent and hopefully added to the environments so we can better make use of them with the simple UI as opposed to command line. But we have use cases including virtual desktop infrastructure, container hosts, big data, Hadoop worker nodes. DevOps has the ability to use this for testing systems very, very quickly without having to wait for an entire clone process to build duplicated virtual disks and so on. Okay. In vSphere 6.7, we introduced this feature through a set of API calls. In vSphere 7, we added to this the ability to instant clone and customize a guest operating system on the Linux side. So you can see that as time goes on, VMware is continuing to add features and functionality to the instant clone process. If this is something that's interesting to you, have a look at the set of APIs and also have a look at the Horizon environment, because this is something that's done every day with Horizon 7 and going forward. Well, it's time to do a lab now with clones and templates. Lab number 16 has us building a virtual machine template from an existing VM, creating a custom specification, and then deploying a virtual machine and utilizing that custom specification. I hope you enjoy this lab. And that does it for this lesson on templates and clones, where we've learned the difference between a template and clone. We've looked at instant clones, and we now know certainly some use cases for all of this stuff. And we know that we're going to be using this stuff on a daily basis in our environment. Now, when we come back, we're going to look at a way for us to take our templates and manage them with vCenter, syndicating or sharing those templates with other vCenter servers in your environment. So when we come back, we're going to be looking at content libraries. We'll talk to you very soon. Thank you.